The certified letter from the Pinewood Heights HOA arrived on a Tuesday morning, and the moment I saw the return address, I knew my peaceful winter was about to become a nightmare. I'm Paul Irving, and I've owned my property at the edge of this development in Flagstaff, Arizona for 3 years now. A sprawling 5-acre lot that I specifically purchased because it was mostly outside the main residential cluster. I tore open the envelope while standing in my driveway, the January wind biting at my face, and read the fine notice with growing disbelief. $500. They wanted $500 because of where I was storing snow from my driveway clearing. According to the violation notice, I was pushing snow onto common HOA property and creating an unsightly mound that violates community aesthetic standards. I looked up from the paper to the massive snow pile in question, sitting a good distance from my house, near what I'd always understood to be the back corner of my property. The pile had grown over the past few weeks as Flagstaff experienced one of its heaviest snow seasons in recent memory. I walked back inside, my boots tracking slush across the hardwood floors my wife Sharon had insisted we install last spring. She was at work, teaching 3rd grade at Mountain View Elementary, which meant I had the whole day to deal with this absurdity. I spread the notice across the kitchen table and read it again, more carefully this time. The letter was signed by Patricia Langford, the HOA president, a woman whose reputation in the neighborhood preceded her like a cold front. The notice included GPS coordinates and referenced a survey map from 2008, before my house was even built. According to their documentation, the snow pile was approximately 20 feet outside my property boundary and onto land maintained by the HOA for community beautification purposes. I grabbed my own property documents from the home office, the thick folder containing everything from the original purchase agreement to the detailed survey I'd commissioned before closing on the land. My survey, conducted by Henderson and Associates, a reputable firm out of Phoenix, clearly showed that my property extended well beyond where they claimed. I laid both documents side by side, comparing the measurements and boundary markers. Either my surveyor had made a massive error, or the HOA was working from outdated or incorrect information. Given that Henderson and Associates had been in business for 40 years and had surveyed half the properties in northern Arizona, I was betting on the latter. I called the HOA office and got their answering machine. Patricia's voice, dripping with false sweetness, informed me that office hours were Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 to 2, and that all concerns should be submitted in writing. It was Tuesday. Of course it was. I left a message anyway, keeping my tone professional despite my irritation, explaining that I believed there was an error in their property assessment and requesting a meeting to review the documentation. Then, I called Henderson and Associates. The receptionist transferred me to Mike Henderson himself, the senior partner who had personally overseen my survey 3 years ago. Mike was in his early 60s, with a weathered face that spoke to decades working outdoors in Arizona's varied climates. "Paul Irving, I remember your property," Mike said after I explained the situation. "That was an interesting survey, lots of elevation changes. What's the HOA claiming?" I read him the coordinates from their notice. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's not even close," Mike said finally. "Your property extends about 200 feet beyond where they're claiming the boundary sits. I've got the original survey documentation here in our archives. Want me to pull it?" "I've got a copy, but if you could review it and maybe provide some kind of official letter confirming the boundaries, that would help," I said. "The HOA is fining me $500. Mike made a disgusted sound. These HOAs, they think they can just make up property lines. Listen, I'll do you one better. I'll come out there myself tomorrow with the equipment and we'll place physical markers at your actual boundary points. Then let's see them argue with GPS-verified survey stakes. No charge, this one's on me. I don't like people questioning my work, especially when I know I'm right. We scheduled for Wednesday morning at 9. After hanging up, I felt better but still frustrated. The fine notice gave me 14 days to either pay or request a hearing before the HOA board. I decided to do both, pay under protest if necessary and definitely request that hearing. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a formal response, citing my survey documentation and requesting they provide proof of their claimed boundary. Sharon came home around 4, her arms full of papers to grade and her dark hair dusted with snow from the parking lot. When I showed her the notice, her usually calm demeanor cracked. "This is ridiculous," she said, dropping her work bag on the counter with a thud. "We specifically bought this property because it had so much space. Now they're saying we don't own what we paid for." "It's not that. They're just wrong about where the boundary is," I explained. "Mike Henderson is coming tomorrow to stake it out properly. Once we have physical markers and his professional confirmation, the HOA will have to back off." Sharon nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We'd both heard stories about HOA disputes turning into expensive legal battles. Our neighbors, the Kramers, had spent thousands fighting over a fence height issue that should have been resolved with a simple conversation. Neither of us wanted to go down that road. Wednesday morning arrived clear and cold, with temperatures hovering around 20 degrees. Mike showed up right at 9 in a truck equipped with surveying equipment that looked like it cost more than my first car. He had a young assistant with him, a woman named Jennifer who carried the tripod and other gear with practiced efficiency. "Let's start with the rear boundary where you've been stacking the snow," Mike said, studying his tablet that displayed the original survey data. "Then we'll work our way around and place markers at all 4 corners and the major midpoints." We trudged through the snow to the area in question. My snow pile, which had seemed enormous before, suddenly looked modest compared to the vast empty space beyond it. Mike set up his equipment and began taking readings, occasionally consulting his tablet and making notes. Jennifer recorded everything on a separate device, creating a redundant record of their findings. After about 30 minutes of work, Mike planted a bright orange stake with a white cap into the frozen ground. The stake had survey tape attached and his company's name printed on it. "This," he announced, "is your actual rear property corner. According to my measurements, confirmed by GPS satellite verification accurate to within 2 centimeters, your snow pile is approximately 203 feet inside your property boundary." I felt vindication wash over me. 203 feet. Not 20 feet outside my boundary as the HOA claimed, but 200 feet inside it. That was a difference of more than 200 feet in their calculations. This wasn't a minor dispute over a few feet. This was the HOA being completely, demonstrably wrong. We spent the next 2 hours staking out the entire property. Mike placed markers at every critical point, and Jennifer took photographs documenting each stake's placement along with the GPS coordinates and relevant measurements. When they finished, my property boundaries were clearly marked with professional survey stakes that would be legally recognized by any court or government entity. "I'm going to write up a formal report," Mike said as we stood in my driveway reviewing the work. "It'll include all the GPS data, photographs, comparison to the original survey showing consistency, and a professional opinion that the HOA's claimed boundary is incorrect by a significant margin." This should be more than enough to shut them down. What do you think they're basing their claim on?" I asked. Mike shrugged. "Could be an old plat map from before this area was properly developed. Could be someone just guessed without actually surveying. Could be they're confusing your property with another lot. Doesn't matter, they're wrong. The county has your correct survey on file from when you bought the place, and that's what matters legally." After Mike and Jennifer left, I took my own photographs of all the stakes, including close-ups of the rear boundary marker. The bright orange stake stood in stark contrast to the white snow, and my substantial snow pile sat in the distance, clearly far from any boundary. I measured the distance myself with a measuring wheel, confirming it was just over 200 feet from the pile to the stake. Armed with this evidence, I called the HOA office again. This time, someone actually answered. It was Patricia Langford herself, her voice exactly as I'd imagined it, with that particular tone that suggested she was already annoyed before I even spoke. "Pinewood Heights, HOA, Patricia speaking." "Miss Langford, this is Paul Irving, Lot 47. I received a fine notice regarding snow storage on my property." "Yes, Mr. Irving. The fine stands until you remove the snow from HOA property or pay the penalty. That's what I'm calling about. I've had a licensed surveyor verify my property boundaries, and the snow pile is actually 200 feet inside my boundary, not outside it. I'd like to schedule a time for you to come view the survey stakes and review the documentation." There was a pause that stretched just a beat too long. "Mr. Irving, the HOA conducts its own property assessments. We don't need to rely on individual homeowner surveys. With respect, you're incorrect about the property boundary. This isn't a matter of opinion. The survey was conducted by Henderson and Associates, the same firm that surveyed most of this development. The boundary is marked with professional stakes and verified by GPS. The fine stands," Patricia repeated, her voice hardening. "If you wish to dispute it, you may request a hearing before the board. The next meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from Friday." "I'll be there," I said, "and I'm not paying the fine. It's based on false information." "Then additional fines will accrue at $50 per day until the violation is resolved," she said coldly. My blood pressure spiked. "You can't fine me for something that isn't a violation. The board will make that determination. Good day, Mr. Irving." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, anger and disbelief warring inside me. $50 per day for a violation that didn't exist. If I let this go to the hearing in 2.5 weeks, they'd claim I owed over $1,000 in fines for snow I'd piled on my own property. I called my lawyer, Robert Chen, whose office was in downtown Flagstaff. Robert had handled our real estate closing and was familiar with property law. His secretary put me through immediately when I mentioned it was about an HOA dispute. "Paul, good to hear from you. What's happening?" I explained the entire situation, from the initial fine notice to Patricia's threat of daily penalties. Robert listened without interrupting, and I could hear him typing notes as I spoke. "Okay, here's what we're dealing with," Robert said when I finished. "The HOA can fine you for legitimate violations of the covenants, but they can't create violations out of thin air. If your snow pile is on your property, they have no grounds for a fine. The problem is that fighting this could end up costing more than just paying the fine, even though you're in the right." "I'm not paying for something I didn't do," I said firmly. "It's not about the money, it's the principle. I understand and I respect that. Here's my advice. Go to the hearing with all your documentation. Bring copies of your survey, the photos of the stakes, and if possible, get Mike Henderson to write that formal report before the meeting. present everything calmly and professionally. Most of the time, when faced with clear evidence, even stubborn HOA boards will back down. And if they don't, then we take it to court. Arizona law is actually pretty favorable to homeowners in these situations. If we can show that the HOA fined you without proper basis, especially if they continue fining you after being presented with contradictory evidence, we might be able to recover not just the fines, but also legal fees and potentially damages for harassment. That made me feel slightly better. What should I do about the daily fines they're threatening? Document everything. Save all communications. Don't pay anything. Let them try to justify those fines at the hearing. The more unreasonable they are, the better it looks for us if we end up in court. After ending the call with Robert, I immediately emailed Mike Henderson requesting his formal report as soon as possible. He responded within the hour, saying he'd have it ready by Friday. I spent the evening organizing all my documentation into a comprehensive folder, everything from my original purchase agreement to the new photographs of the survey stakes. Sharon and I discussed whether we should attend the HOA meeting or have Robert represent us. We decided I should go personally. This was our home, our property, and I wanted the board to see that they were dealing with a real person, not just a legal file. The next morning, Thursday, I decided to be proactive. If Patricia wouldn't come to my property to see the stakes, I'd document everything so thoroughly that she couldn't ignore it. I created a detailed map showing the survey stakes positions, the GPS coordinates for each one, and the distance from the snow pile to the actual boundary. I included photographs from multiple angles, and even shot a video walking the boundary with a GPS device showing the coordinates in real time. While I was outside doing this, my neighbor from the adjacent property, Greg Sanderson, walked over. Greg was in his 50s, a retired engineer who'd lived in Pinewood Heights since the development opened 10 years ago. Morning, Paul. Saw all the survey activity yesterday. Everything okay, I explained the situation. Greg's face darkened as I talked. That's classic Patricia, he said with disgust. She did something similar to the Hendersons on Maple Drive, claimed their garden shed was too close to their property line. Turned out she was measuring from the wrong point. Cost them 3 months of stress before they proved she was wrong. Did she back down when they proved it? Greg shook his head. Eventually, but she made them go through a full board hearing and tried to fine them for the time it took to resolve. They ended up getting a lawyer involved and she finally dropped it. But the relationship between them and the HOA has been poisoned ever since. This was not encouraging news. Is she always like this? Patricia thinks the HOA is her personal kingdom. She's been president for 7 years, runs unopposed because nobody else wants to deal with the headache. Most of the other board members just go along with whatever she says because it's easier than fighting her. We talked for a while longer, and Greg offered to attend the hearing as a witness to Patricia's pattern of behavior. I thanked him but said I'd see how it went first. After he left, I felt even more determined not to let this go. If Patricia had a history of bullying homeowners with false violations, someone needed to stand up to her. Friday arrived, and Mike Henderson's report landed in my email inbox. It was thorough and professional, running 12 pages with detailed diagrams, photographs, and technical explanations. His conclusion was unambiguous. The snow pile in question is located approximately 203 feet inside the surveyed and legally recorded property boundary of Lot 47, owned by Paul Irving. Any claim that this snow pile is located outside Mr. Irving's property boundary is incorrect and contradicts both the original survey conducted prior to purchase and the verification survey conducted on January 18, 2025. I printed multiple copies, one for my records, one for Robert Chen, and one to submit to the HOA. I drove to the HOA office that afternoon during their office hours. The office was located in a small building near the development's entrance, a single-story structure that also housed a small gym for residents. Patricia was behind the desk when I walked in, her blonde hair styled in a severe bob, wearing a cream blazer that looked expensive. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Irving," she said, her tone making my name sound like an accusation. "I assume you're here about your fine." "I'm here to submit documentation proving that your fine is based on incorrect property boundary information," I said, keeping my voice level. I placed the survey report on her desk, along with my compiled folder of evidence. "This is a professional survey report from Henderson and Associates, confirming that my property extends 200 feet beyond where your notice claims the boundary exists." Patricia glanced at the documents without touching them. "As I told you on the phone, the HOA maintains its own property records." "Then your records are wrong. This survey was filed with Coconino County when I purchased the property. It's the legal record of my property boundaries." "I'll make sure the board reviews your submission," she said in a tone that suggested the documents would go straight into the trash after I left. "The hearing is scheduled for February 3rd at 7 p.m. here in this building. You'll have 10 minutes to present your case." 10 minutes seems insufficient given the amount of documentation involved. 10 minutes is what everyone gets. The board has other business to conduct. She stood up, clearly dismissing me. "If there's nothing else, I have work to do." I left the office frustrated but not surprised. Patricia had already made up her mind, and no amount of evidence was going to change it before the hearing. The question was whether the other board members would be more reasonable. Over the next 2 weeks, the fines continued to accrue according to Patricia's timeline. I received a second notice in the mail, this one claiming I now owed $1,200, the original $500 plus $50 per day for 14 days. The notice included a threat to place a lien on my property if the fine wasn't paid within 30 days of the hearing. Robert Chen reviewed the notice and assured me it was largely bluster. They can't just place a lien without going through proper legal channels, and no judge is going to approve a lien based on what you've shown me. But document this too. The more unreasonable they are, the better our case if we need to take legal action. I spent the time before the hearing preparing my presentation. I created a simple PowerPoint showing the key evidence. Photos of the survey stakes, Mike Henderson's professional opinion, the county records showing my property boundaries, and calculations demonstrating that the snow pile was well within my property. I practiced keeping it under 10 minutes, focusing on facts rather than emotion. Sharon came with me to the hearing, along with Robert Chen, who agreed to attend as an observer. The meeting room in the HOA office building was small, with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a table where the 5 board members sat. Patricia was in the center, flanked by 4 other residents I recognized but didn't know well. About 20 other homeowners were scattered in the chairs, some there for other business, others apparently drawn by gossip about my dispute. I recognized Greg Sanderson near the back and gave him a nod. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, working through several mundane items first. Approval of last month's minutes, a discussion about repainting the entrance sign, a proposal to change the pool hours in summer. Finally, after 30 minutes, she reached my item on the agenda. "Next we have Lot 47, Paul Irving, regarding the fine assessed for improper snow storage. Mr. Irving, you have 10 minutes. I stood and moved to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the provided projector. My hands were steady despite my nerves. I'd been rehearsing this for 2 weeks. Thank you. I'm here because the fine I received is based on incorrect property boundary information. My presentation will show conclusively that the snow pile in question is located 200 feet inside my property boundary, not outside it as claimed. I walked through my evidence methodically. The county records showing my property boundaries, the original survey from Henderson and Associates, the recent verification survey with GPS coordinates, photos showing the survey stakes marking the actual boundary, the snow pile clearly visible far from those stakes, Mike Henderson's professional report confirming all of this. In conclusion, I said, approaching the 9-minute mark, I am not in violation of any HOA rule. The snow is on my property where I have every right to place it. I'm requesting that the board dismiss this fine and any accumulated penalties, and that the HOA update its property records to reflect the correct boundaries. I finished with 30 seconds to spare and returned to my seat. Patricia's expression hadn't changed throughout the entire presentation, which was not a good sign. The board will now deliberate, Patricia announced. The next item on our agenda is— Wait, I said, standing again. Don't you need time to review the evidence? We can review and vote at the same time, Patricia said coolly. Please sit down, Mr. Irving. You've had your 10 minutes. The other board members exchanged glances. One of them, a man in his 60s with graying hair, spoke up. Patricia, shouldn't we take a few minutes to look at what Mr. Irving presented? That seemed like pretty substantial documentation. The board received Mr. Irving's initial submission 2 weeks ago, Patricia said, which was technically true but misleading since she'd barely looked at it when I dropped it off. We've had adequate time to review, all in favor of upholding the fine and accumulated penalties. Patricia raised her hand immediately. After a moment, 2 other board members reluctantly raised theirs. The gray-haired man and a woman in her 40s kept their hands down. Motion carries 3-2, Patricia announced. The fine stands. Mr. Irving, you now owe $1,200, and the daily penalty will continue to accrue until the violation is corrected. Next item. This is absurd, I said, louder than I intended. You just ignored everything I presented. Mr. Irving, you're out of order. Please sit down, or I'll have you removed from the meeting. Robert Chen placed a hand on my arm. Paul, let's go. We gave them their chance. We left the meeting room, Sharon gripping my hand tightly, her face flushed with anger. Outside in the parking lot, Robert said, That went about as badly as it could have, which is actually good for us. How is that good? Because they didn't even pretend to consider your evidence. They didn't request time to verify the survey. They didn't bring in their own surveyor to dispute your findings. They just steamrolled over you. That's going to look terrible in court. Plus, they've now created a record of continuing to assess fines after being presented with clear evidence that the fine is baseless. That's harassment, possibly even tortious interference with your property rights. So what's next? I file a lawsuit first thing Monday morning. We'll sue the HOA and Patricia Langford personally for wrongful fines, harassment, and any other causes of action I can think of. We'll also file for an immediate injunction to stop them from placing a lien on your property or assessing further fines. And honestly, with what I saw tonight, I think we're going to win. Monday morning, true to his word, Robert filed a comprehensive lawsuit in Coconino County Superior Court. The complaint ran 23 pages, detailing the entire situation, including exhibits with all the survey documentation. He also filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to prevent the HOA from placing a lien or assessing additional fines while the case proceeded. The court scheduled a hearing on the restraining order for Wednesday. In the meantime, Robert served the lawsuit on the HOA and Patricia personally. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but Robert's process server reported that she'd turned an interesting shade of purple when she realized she was being sued individually, not just as HOA president. The restraining order hearing was held before Judge Margaret Flores, a no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s who'd been on the bench for 15 years. The HOA was represented by their lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Dennis Kirk, who clearly hadn't had much time to prepare. Robert presented our case concisely, focusing on the survey evidence and the HOA's refusal to acknowledge it. He argued that allowing the fines to continue would cause irreparable harm, and that we had a high likelihood of prevailing at trial. Dennis Kirk tried to argue that property boundary disputes were common and didn't merit court intervention, but Judge Flores cut him off. "Counselor, I've reviewed the submitted evidence. The plaintiff has provided a professional survey, filed with the county, showing the snow pile is 200 feet inside his property boundary. Does your client have any contradictory survey evidence? Your Honor, the HOA maintains that." "That's not what I asked. Do you have a survey showing something different?" "Not at this time, Your Honor." "Then on what basis is the HOA assessing these fines?" Dennis Kirk fumbled with his papers. "The HOA board made a determination based on their property records." "What property records? Do they have a survey?" "A legal description that contradicts the county records." "I would need to consult with my client, Your Honor." Judge Flores looked distinctly unimpressed. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is enjoined from assessing any additional fines related to this snow pile, from placing any liens on the plaintiff's property, and from taking any other action related to this alleged violation. Furthermore, I'm ordering the HOA to conduct, at their expense, an independent survey of the plaintiff's property by a licensed surveyor of the plaintiff's choosing. That survey will be completed within 30 days. If it confirms the plaintiff's boundary claims, this lawsuit is going to proceed with my strong encouragement that you settle. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dennis Kirk said weakly. We left the courthouse victorious. The restraining order was a major win, but the order for an independent survey at the HOA's expense was even better. It meant the HOA would have to pay for proof that they were wrong. I chose Henderson and Associates to conduct the court-ordered survey, figuring that having Mike Henderson do it twice would be even more definitive. The HOA's lawyer tried to object, claiming I should choose a surveyor I hadn't used before, but Judge Flores shut that down. Henderson and Associates is a licensed, reputable firm. If you're concerned about bias, you're welcome to retain your own surveyor and we'll compare results. But the plaintiff gets to choose who conducts the court-ordered survey, and the HOA pays for it. Mike Henderson was delighted to do the survey again, especially on the HOA's dime. "I'm going to be even more thorough this time," he told me over the phone. "We're talking corner monuments, boundary line clearing, the works. If they're paying, they're getting the full deluxe survey." He completed the work over the course of a week, and his report was even more comprehensive than the first one. 28 pages of technical detail, survey mathematics, GPS verification, and photographs. His conclusion remained the same. My snow pile was 203 feet inside my property boundary, measured from the rear corner stake. Just to be thorough, Robert Chen hired a second surveyor, an independent firm from Phoenix called Arizona Boundary Solutions, to review Henderson's work. They confirmed every measurement and conclusion. We now had 3 separate professional confirmations that the HOA was wrong. Dennis Kirk contacted Robert to discuss settlement. The conversation, as Robert relayed it to me, was satisfying. "They want to drop all the fines and call it even," Robert said. "I told them absolutely not. They don't get to put you through months of stress, force you to hire a lawyer, and then just walk away. We want the fines officially vacated and a written apology. We want reimbursement of all your legal fees and surveying costs, and we want a formal correction to their property records with written acknowledgement that they were wrong." What did Kirk say? He said he'd have to talk to his client, but honestly, they don't have any choice. If this goes to trial, they're going to lose badly, and the damages could be much higher. I mentioned the possibility of adding a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress and punitive damages. That got his attention. The negotiations took 2 weeks. The HOA board had to approve any settlement, and Patricia fought it every step of the way. But the other board members, particularly the 2 who'd voted against upholding the fine, were ready to end this. They'd received the survey reports and knew the HOA was indefensibly wrong. Finally, at the end of February, we reached a settlement. The HOA would pay me $17,000, covering all my legal fees, surveying costs, and $5,000 for my time and stress. They would issue a formal letter admitting their property records were incorrect, apologizing for the error, and confirming that my snow pile was properly located on my property. The letter would be placed in my HOA file and distributed to all homeowners to correct any false impressions created by the violation notices. Most importantly, Patricia Langford resigned as HOA president as a condition of the settlement. Robert had pushed for this hard, arguing that leaving her in charge would leave the door open for future harassment. The board agreed, tired of the expense and embarrassment she'd caused. The settlement check arrived in mid-March, along with the formal apology letter. I stood in my kitchen, reading the letter aloud to Sharon, savoring every word where the HOA admitted fault. "We wish to formally acknowledge that the violation notice issued to Paul Irving regarding snow storage was issued in error based on incorrect property boundary information. Mr. Irving's property boundaries, as established by professional survey and county records, extend substantially beyond where our records indicated. The snow pile in question was at all times properly located on Mr. Irving's property. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience or distress caused by our error and confirm that Mr. Irving was not at any time in violation of HOA regulations." "I can't believe Patricia actually resigned," Sharon said, reading over my shoulder. "I don't think she had a choice." The board was terrified we'd add her personally to the lawsuit for harassment. Robert made sure her insurance wouldn't cover her if we proved she'd acted maliciously, rather than just made an honest mistake. The letter to all homeowners went out the following week, and my phone started ringing. Neighbors I barely knew called to congratulate me or share their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Greg Sanderson came over with a bottle of wine to celebrate. "You did what a lot of us wanted to do but didn't have the guts for," he said as we sat on my back porch, the weather finally warming into early spring. "Patricia ran this HOA like her personal fiefdom for too long. Maybe now we can get someone reasonable in there. Who's taking over as president?" "Tom Wickersham, the guy with the gray hair who voted against your fine. He's already talking about reforming how violations are assessed, wants to require actual evidence before fines are issued," Imagine that. The HOA held a special election in April. Tom Wickersham ran unopposed for president and won easily. One of his first acts was implementing new procedures for violation enforcement. Any violation related to property boundaries would require a professional survey at HOA expense before a fine could be assessed. Homeowners would get 30 days' notice before any fine was imposed, giving them time to correct issues or dispute the violation. And board hearings would allow for adequate time to review evidence, not arbitrary 10-minute limits. As for my snow pile, it melted with the spring thaw, draining harmlessly into the ground on my property, exactly where it had always been. The bright orange survey stakes remained, a visible reminder of where my property actually ended. I left them there through the summer, and when winter came again, I pushed my snow into the exact same spot without hesitation. Patricia Langford moved away that summer. I heard through the neighborhood gossip chain that she'd gotten a position on an HOA board in Sedona and had already started making waves there. I felt sorry for those homeowners, but at least it wasn't my problem anymore. The real satisfaction came in August when I received the HOA newsletter, now being competently managed by Tom Wickersham. It included a feature on property boundaries and the importance of accurate records, using my case as an example without naming me specifically. The newsletter explained how the HOA had updated all its property records to match county surveys and encouraged homeowners to verify their own boundaries to avoid future disputes. I framed the settlement check stub and the apology letter, hanging them in my home office as a reminder that sometimes standing up to bullies, even institutional ones, actually works. The whole experience had been stressful and expensive in terms of time and energy, even though the settlement covered the monetary costs. But it had also been oddly satisfying to prove, beyond any doubt, that I was right. Sharon and I hosted a summer barbecue that year, inviting all the neighbors who'd supported us or shared their own HOA horror stories. As I stood at the grill, beer in hand, looking out over my property with its properly marked boundaries, I felt a deep sense of vindication. My property extended exactly where I'd always known it did, 203 feet beyond where Patricia Langford had tried to claim it ended. The snow pile incident became something of a legend in Pinewood Heights. New residents would hear the story and nod knowingly, understanding that the HOA had once been a problem, but was now run by reasonable people who respected property rights and evidence. Tom Wickersham proved to be an excellent president, focused on maintaining property values through actual community improvement rather than nitpicking enforcement of arbitrary rules. I ran into Dennis Kirk, the HOA's former lawyer, at a coffee shop in downtown Flagstaff that fall. He recognized me and came over, somewhat sheepishly. "Mr. Irving, I want to apologize for how that whole situation went down. I came in at the end and tried to defend an indefensible position." "You were doing your job," I said, not entirely charitably but understanding he'd been in a difficult spot. "Yeah, but I should have told the board from the start they needed to settle. I could see they had no case once I reviewed your survey documentation." Patricia was just so insistent that she was right that the board kept backing her. I think they were afraid of her. Well, it worked out, and the HOA is better off now, definitely. Tom Wickersham actually listens to my legal advice, which makes my job much easier. Speaking of which, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you might be interested to know that Patricia is already facing a lawsuit in Sedona. Similar issue, tried to find someone for a fence that turned out to be properly located on their property. Some people never learn. I shook my head but wasn't surprised. Patricia was the type who needed to control things, and HOA power had gone to her head. At least she was Sedona's problem now, not mine. That winter, when the snow returned to Flagstaff, I once again pushed it to the same spot on my property. The pile grew even larger than the previous year, fed by a series of heavy storms in January. But this time, no violation notice appeared. No fines. No threats. Just my snow on my property exactly where it had every right to be. Tom Wickersham actually stopped by one afternoon while I was clearing my driveway, ostensibly to chat, but I suspected partly to see the infamous snow pile for himself. "Impressive amount of snow," he commented, looking at the massive white mound in the distance. "Good winter for it. Hope we don't get too much more or I'll run out of room." "Even if you do, you've got another 200 feet to work with," Tom said with a slight smile. "The HOA won't be bothering you about it, that's for sure. I made sure everyone on the board understood exactly where your property lines are." We talked for a while about HOA business. Tom was working on upgrading the community's common areas, actual improvements that would benefit everyone rather than Patricia's focus on enforcement. He'd formed committees of volunteers to maintain the landscaping and organize community events. The HOA was becoming what it should have been all along, an organization that served the homeowners rather than ruling over them. In March, as winter released its grip and the snow began its annual melt, I received a letter from Mike Henderson. It was a thank you note for the business, but more than that, it was a professional courtesy. "Paul, I wanted you to know that your case has actually helped my business. Several homeowners in Pinewood Heights have contacted me to verify their property boundaries after hearing about your situation. I found 2 more cases where the HOA's records were significantly wrong, though thankfully Tom Wickersham has been reasonable about correcting them without anyone needing to get lawyers involved. You standing up to that fine probably prevented others from going through the same thing. Professional surveyors like me appreciate when people take property boundaries seriously. Thanks for fighting the good fight. That letter meant more to me than the settlement check had." Knowing that my stand had helped others, had prompted the HOA to fix its records and prevent future disputes, made the whole ordeal worthwhile. Sharon and I celebrated our 5-year anniversary in the house that spring. We'd made it through the HOA nightmare and come out stronger. The experience had taught us the importance of documentation, standing up for our rights, and not backing down when we knew we were correct. It had also taught us to get involved in community governance rather than leaving it to others. I attended every HOA meeting for the next year, not because I expected problems, but because I wanted to support Tom's reforms and make sure the organization stayed on track. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee, helping to review proposals for home modifications and additions. Having gone through my own property dispute, I was particularly careful to ensure that any reviews were based on actual measurements and documentation, rather than assumptions. The committee work was occasionally tedious, but generally rewarding. We approved most requests with minimal changes, focusing on whether proposals actually violated the covenants rather than trying to enforce some aesthetic ideal. The atmosphere was completely different from Patricia's reign. Homeowners weren't afraid to submit requests, knowing they'd be treated fairly. By the time our second post-settlement winter rolled around, Pinewood Heights had transformed. The HOA had gone from being something residents dreaded dealing with to being a functional community organization. Property values in the development actually increased, partly because of the improved reputation and partly because Tom's infrastructure improvements were attracting buyers. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I just paid the original $500 fine. It would have been easier in the short term, certainly less stressful. But it would have been wrong, and it would have emboldened Patricia to continue her pattern of baseless violations. By fighting, by forcing the issue into the light, I'd helped change an entire community for the better. The orange survey stakes gradually faded and weathered, but they remained visible markers of my property boundaries. I replaced them every few years as needed, making sure anyone looking would know exactly where my property ended. And each winter, when I pushed snow into that same spot, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not smugness exactly, but the contentment that comes from knowing you stood up for what was right and won. Looking back on the whole experience now, several years later, I realize it taught me valuable lessons about property ownership, community governance, and the importance of documentation. When I bought the house, I'd viewed the survey as just another closing cost, paperwork to file away and forget. Now I understood it as one of the most important documents I owned, the legal definition of what was mine. I also learned that HOAs, despite their reputation, aren't inherently bad. They're tools, and like any tool, their value depends on how they're used. In the hands of someone like Patricia Langford, an HOA becomes a weapon for petty tyranny. Under someone like Tom Wickersham, it becomes a genuine benefit to the community. The settlement money, after covering all the actual costs, left us with a small windfall. Sharon and I used it to upgrade our heating system, a practical improvement that would serve us well through many future winters. Every time I adjusted the thermostat, I thought about Patricia and smiled. Her vindictive fine had ultimately paid for a nicer, warmer home. Friends from other developments sometimes asked me about HOAs, whether they should buy in a community with one. My answer was always nuanced. An HOA with good leadership and reasonable rules could be great, maintaining property values and providing amenities. But you needed to research the HOA before buying, read the covenants carefully, attend a meeting if possible, and talk to current residents about their experiences. And always get a proper survey and know your boundaries. The snow pile became something of a running joke among my neighbors. Every winter, they'd watch it grow, occasionally commenting on its size or shape. Some people took photos of particularly impressive piles after heavy storms. It was a visible symbol of my victory over HOA overreach, a mountain of snow on my property that nobody could find me for. In the end, my conflict with the HOA cost Patricia Langford her position and her reputation in Flagstaff. It cost the HOA $17,000 and a great deal of embarrassment. But it gave the community better leadership, corrected property records, and established protections for all homeowners against baseless violations. It gave me the satisfaction of being proven right and the knowledge that I'd stood up for my property rights. And every winter, it gave me the simple pleasure of pushing snow exactly where it belonged, 200 feet inside my property boundary, without fear or fines. That might seem like a small thing, but property ownership is built on small things, clear boundaries, and the rights that come with them. I defended those rights, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. As I write this, years after the initial violation notice arrived, my property markers still stand. The settlement letter still hangs framed in my office, and winter snow still piles exactly where it always has. The HOA, under Tom's continued leadership, thrives as a genuine community benefit. Patricia Langford is a distant memory. Her attempt to find me for something that wasn't a violation now, just an interesting story I tell at neighborhood barbecues. The experience changed how I view property ownership and community involvement. I'm more engaged, more aware, and more willing to fight for what's right even when it's difficult. And I'm grateful, in a strange way, for that Tuesday morning when the certified letter arrived. It led to stress and conflict, yes, but also to vindication and positive change. Sometimes standing your ground over something as simple as a snow pile can make all the difference.